So tonight you want to, like, 5 or 10 minutes at the end? Huh? Yeah, okay. Okay, we're coming back to chapter 9 of the Avatamsaka Sutra. We've just finished a section of verses, and now there's sort of an interlude, and it'll quickly then go into another series of verses. So tonight I think we can do the whole interlude, slowly reading in the Chinese, up to, I think, unmoving wisdom of the thus come one, just before that time. Okay, so doing it slowly.
Page 20, 21.
Yeah, in my text, I see page 20 at the top.
Yeah.
Page 21 in the, what do you have?
The same.
2021?
Yeah.
Okay. 尔时光明过时世界，遍照东方百世界，南西北方四维上下，亦复如是。必诸世界中，皆有百亿眼菩提，乃至百亿四九净天，其中所有悉皆明显。We'll just translate that first section, and then we'll go right on and maybe talk about it at the end. So the part we just read in English is, at that time, light passed through or penetrated. I'm trying to look at the Chinese here. You could say penetrated. Through 10 worlds and everywhere illumined 100 worlds in the east. It was also like that in the south, west, north, and the 4 intermediate directions, as well as above and below. Within each of those worlds, there were 1 billion Jambudvipas, reaching up to 1 billion ultimate form heavens. All of these were clearly revealed in this light. Go into the next section. 彼一言菩提中，悉见如来，作莲花总实思之作。是佛刹为成熟菩萨，所供围绕悉以佛身离故。十方各有一大菩萨，一各无。是佛刹为成熟，诸菩萨诸来依佛所。Let's see. That would be, okay, in English, just as in this place, one could see the thus come one seated on his lotus flower treasured lion's throne, with bodhisattvas as many as 5 motes of dust and 10 Buddha lands circumambulating him, so too, billions of thus come ones seated in this way. Let's see, did we do the spiritual? We did. Because of the spiritual power of the Buddha in each of the 10 directions, there was a great bodhisattva who was accompanied by bodhisattvas to the number of 5 motes of dust and 10 Buddha lands who came to the Buddha's place. And let's just finish up this refrain then. 其大菩萨为闻殊师礼等，所从来过，为今四世界等，本所是佛。为不懂智如来等. And then finally, their names were Manjushri and others. They came from countries called Golden Colored World, and others, and the Buddhas they were served are called Unmoving Wisdom Thus Come Ones. And others. And others. Okay. So, obviously, there's so much we could go into in this passage. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the worlds, the numbers of this, the Jambudvipa, the form heavens, because we thoroughly went over that when we started this sutra, if you remember. So that would be redundant for those who were there then. It wouldn't be redundant for those who are starting new tonight. But you're just going to have to be patient and not get too nervous about understanding this. Obviously, it stretches the imagination a bit, but that's what the Avatamsaka is about, to expand and stretch our awareness and our consciousness. Really, I think what I want to focus on more, and maybe tie this into a theme or a topic, we were both asked to talk about something tonight about Buddhist education. So I'm going to see if I can bring this passage around to that topic. I don't know if I'll do it successfully. This is quite a stretch, but you're looking at this passage and say, I don't see anything regarding education here, but let's give it a try. I would say, let's start with the idea at that time. Light passed through 10 worlds, or light passes through the world. Light passing through or penetrating can be taken literal, and I think it is literal in this text. We've talked about this before. It doesn't mean that it's also not an analogy or figurative language, but we cannot dismiss the fact that this is describing a phenomena that actually happens at a level of insight and understanding that some of us may in fact have access to. I'm not going to say that that's not the case. Most of us, this is something we don't maybe know directly yet, but the text is indicating that with a certain amount of cultivation and removal of the veils of ignorance, not only is this there and available to us to understand in the text, but it's happening right now. That this is not talking about something that was past. So that's why it says, basically, at the time, and that time could be all time. The Avatamsaka has a wonderful expression. It says, when brought to search into this phenomena, it's like looking through a keyhole and seeing boundless space. This is a wonderful passage, and it says, and that moment, when you see it that way, one time is all time, and one place is all places. So this is where we're kind of stretching to, but I'm trying to use the text to indicate that there's numbers of ways to look at this light. The way I would say it tonight is you can also see the light as knowledge, as insight, as a metaphor for even wisdom. As knowledge and really good learning opens up a world to us at every level, at the scientific level, at the humanities level, at the poetic level, at the level of music and arts and science and math. All of these things are knowledge that's there only for us to discover. And the discovery of that takes a certain amount of illumination or light, both coming from the text and the teachers, but also coming from the students themselves. So this mutually interpenetrating light, which is an Avatamsaka concept, could refer to the light coming from the Buddhas, the light coming from those in this assembly, and the light coming from the words that are coming out, as well as what's revealed in the body language. Because there's something happening here, and part of that body language is the illumination or the light of virtue that's radiating from the Buddha. So we could see this then as a kind of statement about a type of education, a model of education that has to do with light. And in this sense, in the Buddhist sense of education, there's two aspects. You want to light up your mind, it says. You want to light up, return the light to illumine within. Light up your mind, see your true nature, and at the same time expand that light. Make that light go out to illumine and reveal the phenomenal world, reality. And so there's a kind of interchange going on. The amount of light that you can gather back through precepts, through your concentration, through your goodness, that light literally expands the measure of your horizons and allows you to see not only far, but deep. Far and deep. And this is lighting up the mind, seeing your nature, but it also then turns around to, and here's where the Bodhisattva comes in a little bit, to actually share and spread and inform and illumine others. And that's why clearly revealed in this light means that we see things as they really are through the light of virtue and the light of cultivation. But it also means we see things as they are with the help of these texts that indicate and point us to things that we wouldn't normally be aware of. And that combination of the text being a little bit of a stimulus for us to look at things differently, and then the actual cultivation, the spiritual practices that generate the light in us that allow us to actually see the text manifest really and not just intellectually. So sometimes in Latin, and a lot of universities use these mottos of Latin in their, whether they actually deliver it these days, I don't know. But let's just say, ideally, you'll see it on the gate or something. They use lumen and lux. Lumen and lux coming from the Latin. Lumen means a light, but it also means an opening. It's very interesting. So the idea of lumen is to open your heart and open your mind to new possibilities, which means, of course, you have to let go of biases and prejudice you bring with you. And that's the bittersweet part of education. There's a letting go and a picking up. And in the Buddhist sense, my teacher would always say, as much as you can let go of, that's how much you can pick up. If you can let go of all your foolishness, you can pick up great wisdom. You let go of a little, you pick up a little wisdom. So it's a kind of exchange thing. This is also an expression you see at a university, lux mentis, lux orbis, which is really interesting. Light your mind, lux mentis, mental, light up your mind, and then lux orbis, light up the world. And again, what we're getting into here is the Bodhisattva path, which is mentioned in this text tonight, Bodhisattvas. So I'm going to kind of present the Bodhisattvas as educators, as educators. And so you could say a Bodhisattva's mind and vow is to the degree I can cultivate and light up my own mind, that's the degree I have some purchase to work with other people. I cannot do that except through transforming myself. So the Bodhisattva mind is basically saying, as I awaken myself, so I can awaken others. While I'm awakening myself, right at that moment, I'm awakening others. And by awakening others, I'm awakening myself. There's a non-duality here. And it's very interesting because my teacher used to say, you all have to talk every day. If you eat, you have to talk. You have to speak the Dharma. You have to lecture. And it's like, well, I don't know any Chinese, then lecture in English. I don't know English, I just know lecture in Spanish. Whatever language you have, lecture it. I don't know very much. Talk about the little bit you know. And I say, well, we want to wait till we're awakened, Master, then we'll teach. And he would always say, if you wait till you're awakened, you will never teach. And it's only by teaching you'll get awakened. Why? Because by teaching, as soon as you open your mouth, you realize you don't know very much. And there's a pressure of people looking to you for some answers and knowledge. That pressure rubs you to inform yourself. But informing yourself means changing yourself. So the pressure of living beings wanting to know pushes the Bodhisattva to deeply study and cultivate. And the deeply studying and cultivating, when it's done well, naturally reaches out to others. Because that knowledge and insight that the Bodhisattva gains is there is no self in others. That's also a false dichotomy. So you don't just cultivate for yourself or learn for yourself. That's not true learning in this sense. So I would say one way to look at this assembly we just saw, this gathering, is to see it as a large classroom. This is an advanced seminar. Okay. Now, bear with me with my creative stretching here. But it's the assembly, they're gathered around the Buddha. The Buddha's got the light. The Buddha is the great teacher. They're coming because they're curious, they're docile, they're wanting to learn. And they're learning in unmoving wisdom. That's the last line here. It's very interesting. Unmoving wisdom is ironically moving wisdom. Now let me explain maybe what that means. Moving wisdom means it's dynamic, it's active, it's outgoing, it's engaged. It's not stagnant. It's not just sitting in a sort of a library mode. But it's unmoving in the sense that it is not swayed and thrown off and phased by all the conditioned things. Pride, anger, the emotions don't move it off that center. And because it's unmoving, it can see things as they really are, see potentials as they really are, and respond. So unmoving wisdom means it's anchored, it's solid, it's selfless. At the same time, it's very responsive and active and fluid. And this is what they're learning to apply. And the reason is from the previous lines we read last week. What's the motivation? It's, and I'm quoting, so all are caused to go, or all are inspired to go towards enlightenment, to awakening. And secondly, in order to cross over living beings. Same language is basically saying it's a transformative impulse. To teach and transform is the impulse behind this. That's why they're learning. And they realize if you're really going to change people, you have to go to this level. You have to go to this level. Merely teaching them how to do a task, merely teaching them technological skills, turning them into tools of a sort, is a kind of education. But that's not causing them to go towards Bodhi. It's not tapping the deepest human potential. And it's not crossing them over to ignorance to real insight. In fact, you can have a technical training education and have no personal deep transformation in yourself whatsoever. And you can actually then have technology at your hands, but no softening wisdom to guide it, and you actually become a dangerous person. So you really have to think about this connection with knowledge and wisdom here. So I would say the Bodhisattvas in this sense are then the future teachers. They're in the assembly, they're learning from the Buddha how to exercise these skills. I would say they're also light bearers, bearers of light. And I like this, so the light that's being penetrated and shedding, they are not only picking it up, but it's catalyzing their own light. And as they move along in their learning, they become brilliant. Now, I don't mean just brilliant in the intellectual self, but brilliant in the glow of their virtue, of their goodness. I remember my teacher said, after you've been in the monastery for a while, when you go out into the world, be as like a bright lamp or a bright light going into dark places. Don't let the darkness occlude you. Bring your light to it and expand it. And so this reminds me of another text that we studied with my teacher. I had to do this at the university too to pass my Chinese exam. I did not pass with flying colors, I'm just going to tell you. I kind of sneaked by on this, but I made it. And this was a Confucian text called the Da Shui, the great learning or the highest learning. And this matches, I think, with this idea that we're looking at tonight with light. This text begins and says basically, let's see, Da Shui, Zhi Dao Zai Ming Ming De, the path of the greatest learning, of the highest education, consists of, resides in, and it has three things. Ming Ming De. Ming is light. Okay? Double Ming Ming, so it's really bright. And then De is virtue. So it's a light of virtue. It's not just a brilliance of intellect or mind, but a brilliance of character and value and substance of a person. It's an accomplished person. So that's the first goal, is to cultivate that in yourself. Then it says, find what is truly good and rest in it. Stay there. Find what's truly good and anchor yourself in that. And then finally, take that and uplift and renovate the people. Teach the people. These are the three things that it's consisted of higher education. And I must say, although we don't have that in our catalog, it really is a good description of what education at the Buddhist university is about. It's first of all to Ming Ming De, to radiate, illuminate virtue in yourself, to embody virtue. And that means thoroughly sincere. Inside and outside is totally the same. The next is find what is good and wholesome. Find out what really matters and meaningful, and then anchor in that. Don't fluctuate once you know what it is. And finally, from that platform, reach out to transform as much of the world as you can touch. So in the Western sense, education comes from the Latin word educere. And it has actually two meanings. One, it means to shape or inform, like we usually think about it. It's something you get. You get an education. But a more interesting meaning, it also means educere, to draw out, to pull out. And I would say, in the Buddhist sense, education is more the second, educere. We study the text. That's a little bit of the input. But the primary goal is to have it open up our hearts so that the wisdom of the text catalyzes the release of that in us. So ultimately, we become the text. We embody the text. So I would say it's a catalyst in the sense of drawing out, rather than what sometimes I call catechism. Do you know what catechism is? I'm familiar with that word.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the Catholic.
It's what?
In the Catholic experience of catechism. I don't know if that's what you
It's basically a book with fixed questions and fixed answers, and it's used for instruction. So a catechism consists of, when I was a kid, we had catechism. And so the teacher would come in, this was a priest, and they'd say, so do you have any questions? And I would start to raise my hand, and here's the question, he'd say. So I put my hand down. Who made you? So I thought, well, that's really good. No, that wasn't meant as an open-ended question. It's a question, and then you turn the page, and there's the answer in the catechism. So he said, turn the page, because I was still thinking, oh, who made me? That's really, I think my mom and dad did? Wow, how did, but I didn't know. And the next page says, God made you. Oh, okay. And then the next question is, why did God make you? And I thought, whoa, that's really curious too. But the catechism gives you the answer. You turn the next page, and God made you for this reason, and so on and so forth. It goes on. So that's catechismal type education. But Buddhist education, and it's basically to have a rote learning and a very formulaic response. It's interested in an orthodoxy, a correctness of beliefs. The Buddhist education is really a little bit different in that it's trying to develop or stimulate an inherent capacity that you have for wisdom and understanding. It's trying to draw it out, kind of starting a fire. I think it was one of the Roman philosophers said something to the effect, the mind is not something to be filled, but a fire to be started. And this is that approach here. So it's not just Buddhist, and this then favors dialogue and questions and answers. And again, our pedagogy at the university, undergraduate and graduate, is dialogical. The teachers are there to start questions, and then there's a discussion-based thing. It's not a lecture-based program. And this follows a deep Buddhist tradition, I think, that you find in the Pali, which is ehipassiko. Ehipassiko was an expression the Buddha used to basically say, come and see for yourself. Consider this. And so even the Buddha, with all his wisdom and knowledge, was still more interested in catalyzing the curiosity and self-discovery of his disciples rather than dogmatically saying this is what it is. And so often you read the Buddhist early sutras and whatnot, suttas and so forth, you see a question and answer. Even the text we're reading tonight, there's something happening, there's statements, then there's more question, there's more verses. It just keeps going like this. It's a very different approach than just declaring. So I say, that's one of the things we see here. There's two reasons, maybe, and the text goes in here to saying the Bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas is one of the spiritual beings, but it's also an aspiration and a human capacity that we have. So we shouldn't think of Bodhisattvas as external gods or deities, but rather it's a human potential that maybe we haven't fully realized. But when we feel altruism and caring and compassion and kindness, that's the juice of a bodhisattva. That's the genome of a bodhisattva stirring in us. And when we push along those lines to develop that, eventually it turns into full-fledged kindness and compassion, caring and generosity and so forth, all of the paramitas. And all of a sudden you're gone from the human, to the bodhisattva, but it's a continuum. It's not two different things. So the bodhisattvas really want to be educated, and they do it for really, I would say, two reasons. One, to transform themselves and realize their full potential. It's integral to have worldly and world-transcending knowledge is integral to the awakening and cultivating of the bodhisattva path. I'm going to say that again because some people think, oh no, you just have to have world-transcending knowledge. But in the Avatamsaka, it says worldly and world-transcending are differences in name only. They interpenetrate. You can use one to get to the other, you can use the other to reveal the other, and so on and so forth. So this is key, that worldly and world-transcending knowledge are integral to awakening and cultivating bodhisattva path. The text says you want to understand the human mind, the mind in all its states. Well, if you think about that, that's basically what a very broad-based liberal education is aiming at. To understand not only the mind in all its states, but across cultures as well. So that's why in the strands, the undergraduate strands in our program, we've gone back to this basic liberal arts education as with the idea that you want to understand the human condition in all its manifestations and its diverse ways of knowing. It's not homogeneous. You go and study, we have a strand that's math, a strand that's science, we have a strand that's rhetoric, but then we have strands in Western classics, Indian classics, Buddhist classics. And by starting these primary texts, you get the deep thought ways and formative structures across cultures, the way different people think. Everybody has family, but not everybody sees family the same way. Everybody has a state, but not everybody sees the state the same way. Everybody has individuals, but the treatment and understanding of what it means to be an individual varies widely. Loyalty, duty, honor, violence, peace, all talk about this, but not in the same ways. And if one hopes to sort of be involved in changing the world, you really need to know these languages, these thought ways of how people relate, what they value, what they believe in. Not to agree or disagree, not to argue for or against, but simply as a base of understanding to begin a discourse. This is really, really quite important. Now, I'm not saying this only for my own beliefs or even for my teachers, but you'll see this in the Avatamsaka Sutra itself. Let me give you some passages that we won't get to tonight, we'll get to later. But one of the Bodhisattvas in another section describes cultivators in the Bodhisattva path. They speak of the languages, discourses, and theories of the world, its regulations and its rules, and expedients for escape. So it's using worldly knowledge, the rules, the theories, the discourses, Plato, Aristotle, Rumi, the Bhagavad Gita, and so forth. These all have discourses and language and all talk about what it means to be a human and what it means to live the full life. There's another section, this is from another section of text. It's because he or she wishes to know the minds, the faculties, the karma, the behavior, all the afflictions, bad habits of living beings that he studies or she studies, all these various disciplines. I mean, this is really quite interesting. So, a Buddhist education to study, for example, our undergraduate, which is a 4-year liberal arts, and our MA, which is Buddhist classics. But let's just talk about the BA, the undergraduate level. Why a liberal education like that? Well, if you want to be a bodhisattva, then it's totally expedient that you know the languages of the world, how people think, how they see, how they believe, how they invent, both war and peace, how they justify, and so forth. So this is just like knowing the languages. I'm putting in quotation marks here. It's not just the linguistics, but it's the deep thought ways and values that are behind all of that you want to have in order that you can begin a conversation and a discourse to teach and transform. And in this sense, the Buddhist principle that everything is made from mind alone is really core in this education. That it's from this mind, its beliefs, its prejudices, its insights, its virtues, that everything comes. All our technological inventions, all our major thought decisions, all our public policies, education, welfare, immigration, and so forth, go back, there's a thought, there's an idea, there's a value. That's the root. Then it manifests out. Change that thought or value and idea, everything else changes correspondingly. So understanding the mind at its deepest level, the thoughts and values that give rise to these things, then gives you a handle to control. For example, research in science could go 100 different directions based on the motivations and values and intentions of the researchers. I mean, I just mentioned this thing in Silicon Valley. There's a number of people with mega millions of dollars, and they're directing scientific research. They're able to infuse that money into scientific research to call what the protocols and the values are. Some of them only are investing in immortality. They want these scientists, and they're tipping the scales of inquiry in science to say, we'll pay you millions of dollars if you can come up for a long life formula that'll keep me around forever. Now, we've got all kinds of problems in the world, not to mention the COVID virus and so forth, and things that we haven't even seen yet. Massive amounts of diseases that afflict hundreds of thousands of people every year. But not putting money into that, but putting money into the search. You see why it's all made from the mind. So if you change the mind and say, oh, what can we do to eliminate malaria? What can we do to eliminate smallpox or polio? You go a different channel and you say, what can I do to make a multimillionaire live forever? Very different. So again, education that calls attention to that is important. When I was an undergraduate, the first time that came out, I looked at this poster and thought, what the hell? It said, to get a good job, get a good education. This was the new thing. It's like, I didn't come here to get a good job. I came here to get what I thought was a good education, but they were saying that was a shift over from a broad-based humanities liberal arts with the move we have now towards occupational or vocational education. And now I would say as a Buddhist, you would change that formula around. Get an education in the good so you can do a good job. That's very different. And so in a sense, don't worry, you'll make a living. You're not going to starve, okay? Chill out. You know, it's just like, but do something and study something that develops you and makes the world a better place. I think this is basically what my teacher was so enthusiastic about. I would say also, and this is from my teacher's commentary in the Avatamsaka, there's a section that talks about the 5 bright studies or the 5 bright sciences, which is a Sanskrit classification of liberal arts for that time. It's parallel, but not exactly identical to the modern. It had 5 dimensions. It was science of language, grammar, composition, literary, science of logic, reasoning, medicine, mathematics, fine arts and crafts, and so forth was all part of. And by the way, this was taught at Nalanda, an early Buddhist university that preceded Oxford and Cambridge. But a monk who went to study at Nalanda studied this as well as the text. And if he mastered or she mastered both the worldly and the world transcending, they were called Pandita. It was an honorific title for a learned monk or nun in both of these fields, the worldly and the world transcending. So I would say that's really what we're trying to do, is to lay a basic, what we call seminal or root education, with the idea, especially today, your bachelor's degree is not going to confer on you a career, okay? I'm sorry to say this, I think it's wasted if you specialize in something very narrow for those 4 years that you have available to you, to really broaden and think through and have your values raked over the coals and think through. Then you can go on to professional school or graduate school or even get a job where the training will occur in the job for what you want to do. But the difference will be, not only will you be interesting to yourself, probably for the rest of your life, instead of just sitting watching, soap operas every day when you come home from work, you'll have stimulating thoughts and whatnot. But more importantly, you'll be able to evaluate how anything you're doing in your job contributes or takes away from human progress, really, really deeply. And I think that moral dimension only comes from thoughtful cultivation in those 4 years. So we have a combination of contemplative exercises that go along with this study, because you're teaching the person not what to think, but how to think. And not what to believe, but how to come to beliefs by listening to themselves, developing that inherent wisdom. So it's a kind of a niche education. I wouldn't say it's for everybody. I wish it was for everybody, because I think given a background like that, we would have that combination of knowledge and ethics, or technology and wisdom, which is really the biggest challenge, I think, of our contemporary time. Alfred North Whitehead, the famous Western philosopher, said, the biggest challenge that we're going to face in our generation coming up after him, and would determine the future course of human history, and I must say, I don't think we're doing a good job on it yet. If you look at the environmental crisis, and you look at other crises going on in the world right now, you realize this separation of fact and value, of ethics and virtue and knowledge, and we're not there yet. They're still further dividing. We're creating weapons of mass destruction as I speak that could wipe out all of humanity, because we have the power to do that. But we don't have the wisdom to harness and channel that and say, maybe we shouldn't develop everything we're capable of developing. So Whitehead said, the biggest challenge will be resolving the issue of the proper relationship between science and technology and religious and spiritual values. Resolving the relationship. He says, because so fundamental is our religious and spiritual symbols by which we give meaning to our lives, and so powerful the scientific and technological knowledge which we shape and control our lives, we got to get these two in harmony. And this was basically Master Hua's vision. He saw that America especially had many blessings, many richnesses, and had a very quality, formal educational structure that everybody in the world wanted, especially at the graduate level, to participate. But he said, more fundamentally, is that it's not deeply grounded in virtue and ethics. And unless you do that, you will increasingly do the thing that Whitehead was worried about, these two diverge. So you don't nearly have to produce people who are smart, but good. I'm just saying it in a really different way. Because the more smart you are, the more potential you have for good or harm. And we can see that today. So it's almost like he was creating the university as an alternative to reconciling this split that was occurring. And he said, all the key decisions, all the policies, all the institutions and inventions are coming out of university-trained people in the modern world. They touch the future. But unless you also touch their hearts for goodness and virtue, that knowledge, untempered by caring and compassion, could actually ruin the world. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I don't think that's an exaggeration. So his effort in education was to bring those two back into some sort of alignment. So although I stretched it a bit tonight with the text, I was trying to respond to the request to talk about the education. And Jin Chuan hopefully will say something too, because we were going to ask Jim Wei, but Jim Wei's not here tonight. But both of them have come through two systems of education. Jin Chuan in particular coming through, I think, Stanford University, and then DRBU. So I think he's more more qualified in many ways to sort of talk, I guess, from personal experience, and maybe let you know that admission is still open for this coming fall. And I think, if all things go well, we should be able to have in-person classes again. And why is that important? Well, from what I was describing to you tonight, you cannot transfer virtue, wisdom, embodiment through Zoom. It just doesn't Zoom. You have to be close to those. And of course, Master Hua's thing was, you cannot teach this without teachers who embody it. So you're not just hiring people on their knowledge skills, you're hiring them on their embodiment of goodness and virtue, or their willingness to try to cultivate it, and an acknowledgement that it matters. So as a result, students and faculty and staff living, working together begin to see and feel viscerally what it's like to try to embody and work on this. You're not perfect, but you're working on becoming better. That cannot be communicated online and in Zoom. And so the really important part of this education, as it has been from ancient times to the present, is embodiment and closeness to that, because you see the falseness close to. On a Zoom, I can pretend to be anybody I want. It's like Facebook. But when you're up close, observing each other, you can see if it's true or real. And only that inspires. I won't tell you an experiment they did at Harvard. That's another talk. But they clearly found that simply teaching the classics and teaching ethics does not instill that. It had to be embodied in the faculty. And all the students said, because it wasn't, we were learning, ethics is something you argue for when you've made mistakes and you rationalize your bad behavior rather than changing it. Yeah, so it's, never mind. We'll stop there for tonight, and hopefully Jin Chuan will pick it up. And
yeah, I was thinking maybe what would be valuable to share about DRBU. So for those who maybe just are listening in, Dharma Realm Buddhist University, actually what Marty was referring to in the Avatamsaka is actually a good fit, because this particular sutra is considered the sutra on the Dharma realm. And in a real way, coming to DRBU is actually like entering the Dharma realm. And you get to take a deep dive into the Avatamsaka Sutra, where I was just kind of reflecting on what Marty was saying about this light being kind of this wisdom, or even this kind of kindness. And if you imagine the worlds, it says the worlds in all the different 10 directions are illuminated, but everybody sitting in the classroom is actually kind of a world unto themselves. And you actually see it when there's that kind of light being put forward from the students, from the instructors, from really seriously looking at these texts in a way that is actually deeply respectful, asking difficult questions of the text and yourself. Something lights up in the heart, in the mind. Something softens. I was thinking just very concretely, this morning, I'm doing a class with Doug on comparative hermeneutics 2. We call it comparative hermeneutics 2 because one aspect of the MA program is learning the Western modes of thinking that we're interpreting Buddhism through. So it's kind of a deeper understanding of our own modes of thinking to see how that perhaps, you could say, closes down ways of seeing things and also potentially opens up ways of seeing things. And so this time we were reading, and this is very Doug, if people know Doug Powers, we were reading Urugare, which is a very kind of deep female philosopher, and we were reading her critique of Heidegger called Forgetting of Air. And it's just, I won't go into the details of it, but it's asking the reader, the students, ourselves, to look very deeply into our experience of, actually the process of being born and how that could influence the way that we are in the world, the way we use language, the way we interact. Is it a place where we reject that kind of initial caring relationship with our mother? Or is it actually a defense mechanism from that loss? And I think honestly, probably nowhere else in the world is having that kind of conversation where we're talking about this very authentically. We're actually reflecting, so what is that experience like, and what is our relationship to our parents, to ourselves, to each other? Can we actually allow another person to exist without having to create a whole defense mechanism with our words? Can I authentically be there? And at the very end of class, this is very classic DRBU. It's interesting when the students was leading the class and asked what I would just want to go around and hear how people took the class. And each person was shared. And it was actually, I was quite moved by people sharing because they really, you could say they first said, I was trying to read this text and it made absolutely no sense. But said, well, after the conversation in class, something really opened up in my heart. One student actually started to cry. And it's actually interesting that we had a prospective student in the class. And afterwards, we talked with him afterwards with Doug. So actually, after I came to this class, I'm definitely coming. You know, like, let's make a big decision. If I can get in, I'm thinking I'll come. And, you know, after I was just reflecting, I was like, wow, you know, nowhere else had that kind of opportunity to so deeply enter into, this one's a Western text, right? A Western philosopher, but engage it in such a meaningful way. We're not there to kind of just criticize their point of view or even just agree with their point of view, but say, what insight, what light, what Marty was saying, what light do they have to bring to these very deep questions of humanity, of my existence, of the way that we are together in the world, our relationship to nature. She made the connection that our connection to our mother, you could say, is actually connected also to our relationship with the nature, the natural world. And she makes some very deep ways of reflecting on those places in terms of is it a mode of domination and control, or is it made of openness and gratitude, right? And so it's very interesting to kind of have that opportunity to have that conversation. So I'm right now going to be an instructor in the classes, but I always feel very blessed because I learn so much every class from the students' questions and the text, because they just get deeper and deeper through the years. I can say another thing, having also kind of engaged a little bit more in the BA program, is that it's a place where you get to explore many different strands of thinking. And so this one, I remember doing one with the Western classics as well, the Western classics too, where we studied the kind of early Greek philosophers. But again, this is where I found DRBU was really, it has a deep sense of gratitude again to be able to be in the community, because we got to explore these deep thinkers in an existential way. I was introduced to a philosopher, Hadot, actually Marty, I think, introduced him to our university. If you're interested, you can look it up. Hadot is philosophy as a way of life. And he describes that in Western philosophy, in the early Greeks, philosophy was a way of life, a way of, you could say, brightening our virtue, of embodying virtue. And there were spiritual exercises, contemplative practice that went along with learning, that learning wasn't just conceptual, but was emotional, aesthetic, touching deep parts of our sense of meaning and purpose. And he said what happened was, at a certain point in Western development, Western history, philosophy became the handmaiden of theology. So the spiritual exercises became part of the Christian tradition. And at a certain point, when, you could say when scientific revolution and things, philosophy broke away from that and became its own discipline, but left behind all the spiritual exercises. And so what you ended up having as philosophy was a very conceptual way of being, of studying. And he was saying, but that's not actually what it was like when you were studying in these schools in the early Greeks. Plato's academy was a place you learned, and there was this constant questioning, it was an embodied place, right? Aristotle, the Stoics, the Epicureans, the skeptics, they were all spiritual schools, you could say, in the way that we see things now. They weren't, you just study some kind of argument and you analyze it purely within that kind of, I remember studying, if I mentioned Stanford, I would try to study formal logic. And it was, you have these mathematical symbols, you make equal signs, and you're like, it's very hard, it's kind of all these concepts, and like, how does this all work? And I mean, there's a value to that, for sure, especially if you're trying to do computer science and things in technological kind of binary approach. But in terms of informing how we are with each other, there's not as much conversation about that. And so in the class, what was really wonderful is we got to go through all these philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, all the way up to Augustine, and we didn't just explore their thinking, but we got to ask questions like, so if we really were to take on this philosopher's philosophy, how would that ask us to be? How would we need to transform ourselves? Right? How if we were to really look at Plato's kind of writing on the Symposium about eros and how he looks at, you could say, this energy of, in the West, we sometimes use it as kind of this love or this energetic creative impulse that has a deep influence on Western thought. But how are we using that in our own lives? And how do we transform it in our own lives? And we use the text as a kind of a mirror to help us see ourselves more clearly. But then also as almost like food that we eat to transform ourselves as well. And so, as another class that I just felt deeply grateful for. And maybe just as a last reflection, is I also get the chance to be part of campus life because I'm a chaplain and also live in the dorms. And I think there's another quality that I think is actually really important for the education to take place, which is, I don't know if you can really use the word spiritual friendship, but definitely there's friendship. There's a wholesome friendship where, and how you would describe it, there's a kind of a caring atmosphere where people are being supported in their goodness. And of course, we all sometimes do something that might be inappropriate or things, but the sense is we really are here to support your goodness. And you see it among the students of a kind of thoughtfulness, a kind of caring for each other, cooking for each other. The way that people, share pretty deeply of themselves in conversations that's happening outside the classroom. And to me, that's another very important part of the education, is that there's a safe place to really show up and then be able to explore who we really are, who we want to become. I don't know if there's a particular story that I could mark out. I remember we sometimes have these dorm dinners where we go around and we ask a question. Like for instance, I remember, let me just finish with this one. One student who came into DRVU who was he actually brought me a lot of joy just watching him over the years. Because he came in very, very quiet, very, very shy. Very, very shy. So much that I remember talking to him first time, and he didn't respond to me. His parents responded to me. and then over the years in the space, just kind of opening up and sharing very deeply about his own process, his own thoughts, and his gratitude in being able to be in the space, and his kind of finding his own voice. And I just had so much happiness to see this kind of young man finding his own voice in the school, where I think in normal university, he would just be somewhere in the corner and not really nurtured in that way. I'll finish with the last question. Actually, what was really fun was I actually got to teach the Western Classics class, and we were doing Antigone, Antigone, which is a Greek play. And so I made the contemplative exercise for the classes. We're going to act out the play. So it was Antigone, when Creon, who's the tyrant, right? He's kind of enforcing his will on them. They're going to act it out. So at one point, he looks kind of at me a little bit, what do you call it? Kind of, what's the right word?
Tentative?
Not tentative, but he kind of like sheepishly, like, And he put on he had a hat in his hat. He put on his hat backwards because he was playing Antigone. He says, Antigone is kind of rebellious. And then he acted Antigone really well. And I thought, wow, And from a shy young man, he's acting out Antigone and just trying to really get into the emotions and the experiences of what that would be in the play. And I thought, that's something that the university or just a good education allows for somebody to begin to explore so many dimensions of their humanity that is really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. We could probably go on.
Keep
and
going
and
on
talk
in so
more,
many
but-
years, yeah.
But anyways, maybe people that are interested in whatnot, what's the website is?
I think Locke has it. I think, well, if you want, there's drbu.edu, Dharma Realm Buddhist University, and you can find there's lots of different information there. I think you'll find some talks by Marty too there. You can click on him, introducing the school, and some kind of stories from graduates and students. But it's something I think is very meaningful, and so if people, yourself, actually we take all ages, and that's actually what's something quite nice about this school is you don't just have young people, you have people 50s, 60s, 70s even.
Barely that old.
Yeah, but the wonderful thing about the school is that everybody's views are and ways of being are respected because everyone has wisdom. And so that's what's valuable is to be able to bring that out in each of us and learn from each other. So there's a diversity of cultures, diversity of backgrounds and experiences. So it's an interesting place. So yourself, or if you know of friends, and now that COVID's happened and the whole world is upside down, you go, well, maybe I want to shift areas to go to. Actually, DRB is not a bad place to be able to explore that.
The other good thing is that we spent a lot of time thinking about this and really tried to take Master Wa's vision of education and translate it into a modern context. And we were very happy that we finally got full accreditation. So we have the full recognition of the larger accrediting body for a very special and unique form of education that's just not cookie cutter. And in that space, we are free to explore this educational model and have the full accreditation when the students graduate. Generally, experimental schools like this have to struggle for a long time and sometimes never get that larger recognition. But a combination of a group of people, like working on this really carefully, thinking it through, and also I think the time. There is a sense in higher education right now that this is sorely needed. We have to move away from specialized technological only education and talk about values and so forth. In the last 4 to 8 years in the political situation in the United States, and now the current issues with struggling with racism and so on and so forth, people are realizing if we're going to change this, we have to get it down to this deep educational level to begin the transformation. And that means a different kind of education that's more qualitative, that's more liberal in the sense of investigating all these areas of thought, and more dialogical, conversational. The idea that you're just going to fill up heads through Zoom courses isn't going to change this world. And so part of one of the biggest things that he's talking about is learning how to talk to each other.
Yeah,
because we have discussions, you not only have to talk, but you have to listen.
Yeah.
And so that the listening to each other and the talking, that model of education for 4 years makes you a different person when you come out rather than you were just regurgitating something that was poured into you. So I think now a lot of people in higher education are realizing that that's where the shift has to occur. There's many ways to do it. Ours is one way to do it, but it has to bring back the human and the human transformative and not just what we would call for education for transformation as opposed to education for vocation or education for making money. If you don't transform at this seminal age, you miss a window of opportunity, and it's really hard to change it later. So partly that is not so much us telling students, but getting them to listen and talk to each other carefully, and then using these texts with these really timeless ideas of what, to provoke a discussion. Usually at the end of class, we do an exercise of, so how has your thinking changed from your first idea to now in the end discussion? And often I hear people say, she said something that made me think about it a totally different way I never did before, and so. That's the value of that, the dialogical. So anyhow, enough tonight. We're going to do our transference. If you're interested, go to the drbu.edu site. And thank you for being patient. We went overtime again. This is my character flaw.
Okay, so dedication of merit. as one and radiant with light. Share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel this darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels. Wish everyone a good evening. Amitofo.